Can you hear me? Let's go ahead and get started. And to get started, I would like to ask everyone to stand, and we will do a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out this evening. And no, we're not going to stop the proceedings in order to hear from the president. But I'm sure we'll hear later. My name is Lisa Middleton. I'm a member of the City Council and a member of the subcommittee that is responsible for organizing the public forums and for much of the development of options. But I want to emphasize right at the very beginning, every decision that will be made by the full City Council, and all 5 individuals will be responsible for the vote. Our responsibility here is to tee up the kinds of decisions and to ensure that the public has the greatest opportunity to be involved as we move forward. This is going to be a substantial change for our city, to move from at-large elections to district elections. Our goal is to make sure that this process works. I'm very pleased that it was a unanimous decision of the entire City Council to move forward. And because of that unanimity and because of that desire on the part of all of us to make this work, we were able to obtain additional time from the plaintiff's attorney, and we have through the end of this year to complete this process. We're going to use all of that time so that we make sure that we get it correct and that everyone in the public who wants to be involved in the process has an opportunity to be involved. Our issues currently that we are looking at are primarily issues of communities of interest. One of the fundamental obligations that we have is to be able to define a community of interest and bring people together in districts so that those communities of interest are appropriate. So in your neighborhoods, one of the questions that you should be asking yourself is, what are the neighborhoods that I want to be associated with in the same district, and why? And that why is perhaps the most important part of the conversation. So at the end of the meeting today, we're going to stay here until everyone who wants to speak has had an opportunity to speak, and we don't even have timers. And this is going to be a bit more informal. You're going to be able to ask us questions when you're up there at the podium, so we will do this a bit differently. But our focus is on communities of interest. We're going to spend a little time defining what communities of interest are. We're going to walk you through the process. I'm up here with my colleague, Council Member Jeff Coors, and with our City Clerk, Anthony Mejia, and we are really fortunate to have Mr. Mejia involved in this process. He's gone through it before in other cities, and he even knows how to use the software. So with that, one of the things I will tell you is we have some really incredible software that will allow people to develop their own maps. But we will also be putting together programs that will make it easy for those who are not computer literate to be able to use paper and data that we will give to you so that you can develop your own maps. And with that, I would like to give it over to Councilmember Coors and allow him to introduce the committee that is advising City Council.
Great. Thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone for coming. You know, we've spoken to a number of the cities that have gone through the process, and they said if you're lucky, 10 people will show up at the meetings. So this is just typical Palm Springs. We always are overachievers, and the community is always more engaged than most places. So I want to thank everyone for coming. We are live streaming, so people can watch it. It's also being recorded, so it will be shown on Channel 17, and it will be on the city website. So people have the opportunity who couldn't come to hear it, and we'll be repeating this throughout the process. These are all in excess of what the state law says we should be doing, but we really want to do extra outreach. So I appreciate everyone coming in person. Two other members of the city council are here, Mayor Moon and Councilmember Holstage. According to the city attorney and the Brown Act, they're not allowed to talk. They shouldn't eye roll all too much, but you know, no one can see. But they're both here, and we appreciate their being here because I think the whole council wants to hear from the community. In addition to our city clerk, our city manager, David Reddy's here. Our communications director, Amy Blaisdell, is here. And I also want to touch on, we do have a working group of residents who are doing a lot of the sort of the deeper dive, doing a lot of research. They've been meeting weekly. It's a continuation of the government reform working group of the Ethics, Transparency, and Government Reform Task Force, which was 5 members appointed by the mayor and myself. Councilman Middleton and I added an additional 4 folks with the consent of council because we wanted to make sure we had a good diversity in the people on it, both ethnically, age-wise, where they live. The majority, I think 6 of them are here today, so I just want them to raise their hand or stand up because people, I'll call you out, because if you want to talk to someone other than a council member on this, and they're meeting on their own, not with us, we want you to know who they are. So Kathy Wormerick. Thank you, Kathy. Tobias Barrington Wolf. Thank you. Stephen Moses. Aftab Dada. Melanie Brenner. And in addition, who aren't here are Alexis Ortega, Doug Donenfeld, Gary Soto, and Dixie Miller. Because we're doing, I think, 5 of these this week, people are splitting up how many they go to, so I really appreciate the majority of folks coming here today. And with that, why don't we move it to the presentation by our city clerk.
Good evening. I want to just point out what paperwork you have available for you. First, you have the PowerPoint that's located in the back of the room. On the green paper is a short memo that explains communities of interest, so it can give you some ideas on some comments you might be making. The full schedule for the upcoming meetings that will be going through December. And then the paper map. So there's going, as we go through the presentation, there's basically 3 levels of engaging in the mapping process. And the simplest is to use the paper map, and to supplement it are some of these what I call heat maps that show you where the minority groups live within the city. And then additionally, because this involves addressing minority groups, the council felt that it would be a great idea to synergize these efforts also to coincide with our recruitment for boards and commissions. So the white sheet that has a pink sheet on the back has information regarding our boards and commissions, and the white sheet is the actual application. And then lastly is this half sheet. So if you're somebody who's shy or doesn't want to come up and speak on camera, you're welcome to fill out your comments on communities of interest that affect you, and go ahead and submit them to me, and then we'll make sure that the demographer gets all of this information. And then lastly, my deputy city clerk is here. She's taking copious notes on any comments that are made by the public so that we can also refer those to the demographer as we're going through the mapping process. So to begin with, currently the city is in an at-large election, so that means all of the council members, including the mayor, are voted on at large by everybody in the community. And then we are considering transferring over to from district or by district elections, in which the council member must reside in the district that they're going to represent, and then only people within that district would be eligible to vote on that council member. Currently, the city charter allows for a 5-member council, and so as we're considering what to switch over to, either a 4-member, 4 districts with a at-large mayor elected, or a 5 single-member district with a rotating mayor. Those are really the 2 considerations we have right now. Although if the city council or the community in the future wants to go to a 7-member district, that would likely need to go and be submitted by a charter amendment and to the vote of the people. So this illustrates kind of the idea behind the whole districting process. As you can see, in an at-large election, if the minority voters are in a particular location located in a particular city, you could see that they would always be outvoted by the majority voters within that city. But if you were to break it up into 4 districts, you can see that now that minority group is able to elect and make decisions for their district.
So the goals that we adopted on May 16, and you can see them here, but I want to repeat them. Maximize the goals of the CVRA, including civil rights, equality, and inclusion. Palm Springs is a city that, in our mission statement, commits ourselves to being a city of inclusion. And there are so many individuals in our city who have faced discrimination, often severe discrimination, at one time or another in their lives. We want to walk the walk and make sure that as we approach an issue such as this, that we do everything that we can to support the civil rights of all of our citizens. There are cities that have taken different stands and that have decided that they want to fight this. We did not want to be one of those cities. It's not in keeping with who Palm Springs is. We want to prioritize the creation of majority-minority districts. That also includes whether we can create a majority-minority district. Can we create a district or districts in which minority voters have more influence over the outcome of elections than they currently have? To the extent practical, we want to keep our organized neighborhoods intact. We have a great tradition, one I certainly very personally have had involvement, but 3 of the 5 members of our city council were leaders of their neighborhood at one time or another. So we understand the value that the neighborhoods bring to our city, and as much as we can, we want to keep them intact. There are 45 neighborhoods. We did not say we will guarantee that we can keep every neighborhood intact, because that's just simply not realistic to say that that is a fundamental requirement. We will do everything we can. Maintain the principle that the best interest of the city as a whole remains the first responsibility of all elected officials. I don't know how many times I have been told over the last few months that if you are elected from a district, then you will have absolutely no concern for anything other than what's in the best interest of your district. I reject that. And I believe that we want to make sure that everyone who serves on our city council does, in fact, put the best interest of the city first in every decision that they make. And we will back that up as we move forward by writing into the ordinances a responsibility of every member of the city council to act in the best interest of the city as a whole, and to take things, and I will use an example. When it comes to street repairs, that street repairs must be prioritized based on an objective measure that treats all streets in the city evenly and does not divide street repairs up by city council district and does 20% in this district, 20% in that, or 25% in this district, or 25% in that. We want to ensure that those who are sitting on our council put the city first. Our process is to evaluate our current structure of government and demographics, compare them with other comparable cities, recommend a structure of government that best achieves the goals of the CVRA and the long-term needs of the city, encourage and work through communication platforms to engage with people throughout the city. We're holding 5 different meetings this week, and that's just the beginning of the process. We're required by law to hold 4. We have broken this process up into 3 phases. The first phase, which is going to begin in June and will run through the end of August, is going to be the process of communities of interest and defining the process as we move forward. We're going to be meeting tomorrow at the James O. Jesse Center, on Thursday with the Demuth Community Center. Also on Thursday, we'll be meeting at the 1 PS meeting. Wednesday evening, we'll be at City Council. In late July through September, we will do map development, and we will also, in addition to debating the questions of form of government, which will be resolved at the first meeting in October. So for all of you who want to get into that question of how many districts we should have, that discussion is going to be highlighted in the month of September, and that will be the focus of our conversation with a decision on October 4. Once we've made that decision, we'll move into phase 3, which will be the defining of the districts and the maps, really bringing all of the maps back together so that ultimately we will narrow down in late November the number of maps that we are looking at and make decisions at our meetings in December, finalizing the maps that we are going to use, which the first opportunity for use of those maps will be the election that is scheduled for November 2019. One of the other issues that we will address as full City Council is the question of whether Palm Springs should continue to hold its elections in odd years, or whether or not we should move our elections to be held concurrent with the statewide and federal elections that are held in even years. There is a modest advantage in terms of cost associated with having an election in even years. There is a bigger advantage in that turnout is greater. Most particularly in presidential years, turnout is significantly greater. There is a disadvantage in that we don't have quite the focus of attention on our own issues when you're in an even year that we do have in odd year elections, where most all of the attention is on our own election offices. So, Anthony?
So as we're looking at the criteria in developing these district maps, federal law requires that all districts have equal population. And on our paper maps that you may have in front of you, you can see that the point is trying to get as close to 11,138 people as possible. So as you're playing around with these mapping systems, that's the goal. And there can be a deviation of up or down to 10% overall. But the goal is to try to get as close to as possible as 11,000. And then if it's a 5-member district, then the goal is to get to 8,910. And so as you're looking at these maps, those instructions are already printed on the maps, and so you can see that as you're playing with the systems. Second is to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, which is to basically ensure that minority groups' voting power is strengthened, not diluted. And then to ensure that the city, or the city in this case, is not racially gerrymandering the map. And so in a case where it's really trying to segregate minorities rather than strengthen their voting power. Other traditional criteria include communities of interest, which is the focus of tonight's meeting, but also for an insurity to have compact and contiguous districts. It doesn't have to be a perfect square, but the idea is that they make sense, that it looks reasonable, that it wasn't gerrymandered. Visible boundaries, so are there mountains, lakes, rivers, major roads that would make sense for one district to separate from another district? And then another criteria is planned future growth. So if there's a particular area in the city where there's a large development planned, we can add that to the population count. So defining communities of interest. So hopefully you have the green sheet so you can see a little bit more closely what this says. But and these are just ideas, what we really want to hear from the community is what are the communities of interest that you believe are in your neighborhoods. And so some possible ideas are school attendance areas, natural dividing lines in the neighborhood such as major roads and highways, areas or landmarks around such as parks, maybe it's the convention center, something that is a landmark within your neighborhood and people tend to congregate around it. Common issues, neighborhood activities, legislative election concerns. So if there's a particular area in the city that maybe feels that's underserved or underrepresented and it wants to, in that area feels like it needs to have its own district, then we want you to discuss that. And then if there's any shared demographic characteristics, such as income level, education, linguistic isolation. But again, the main question is what communities of interest are in your neighborhood that we need to know so that we can ensure that the maps reflect that. And then the second part of that question is, do you want one council member or multiple council members to represent that area? So for instance, if you live near a particular park, Demuth Park, and you think that it'd be better, no, actually, the downtown. If you think the downtown should be represented by one council member that kind of is the council member that represents the entire business community, or would it be better to have multiple council districts touching the downtown so that multiple council members are responsible for it? So that's more feedback that we'd like to hear from the community. So the demographic overview for the city. I know it's really small. So you can see that the demographics in the city, we have approximately 25% that are Latino, 64% white, 4% African American, and 5% Asian American. As you go through the mapping systems, you'll be able to pinpoint the demographic makeup within a census block. And a census block is literally the size of a street. And so while the map shows these areas as a little bit larger, these paper maps, if you go into the mapping systems, you'll be able to break it down into smaller units. So just know that depending on the tools that you use, you'll be able to drill down even further on the demographic data. So where the Latino populations live. So there's this map, as I refer to as a heat map, shows the concentrations of minority groups within the city. Latinos are particularly concentrated in the Desert Highlands area, and then also just south of the airport near Demuth Park. And then Asian Americans are particularly located near Demuth Park as well. And then African Americans are particularly located near the James O. Jesse Center. And then when we talk about our neighborhood associations, our mapping system is going to include an overlay, which has the neighborhood associations within it. So as you're drawing the maps, you're going to have access to all of these heat maps, as well as the neighborhood maps and some other overlay information so that you can turn them on and off so that you can, depending on what your focus is. So the map drawing tools. So we know that we have the paper map, which is illustrated to the right side of the screen. And then there's supplements to that. So as you want to drill down and create maps that are more robust and more informed, there's an Excel spreadsheet that you'll be able to use alongside almost like a Google map system, and it's numbered. And so as you plug in the numbers into the Excel spreadsheet, which is represented right here, you'll be able to calculate the exact demographic makeup within that district. And so using the one-page maps, you can either do it by itself using this, which the yellow numbers indicate the population within that district. And then again, you could literally take a crayon and draw on it and draw the map so that you're getting as close to possible as to that 11,000 or 9,000 mark. And then you could submit that. And what we're asking is that you also provide a brief description of why you think that map is particularly good or what that district represents. And you don't have to draw a map of the entire city unless you want to. You could draw a map that just represents what you think would be the ideal district for your area. Or you could decide that you want to draw a map for the entire city. In either case, we just ask that you provide a brief description as to what your focus is. So then using the actual online mapping system. So it's a very robust system, and as you're clicking on each census block, and these are very small units, you're going to be able to see the demographic data for each of those districts, and you're also going to be able to then use the mapping system to draw the districts as you see fit. And it will give you live updates as you're drawing. It'll tell you if you're reaching the population target, and it'll also tell you the demographic makeup within that district as you're drawing it. And then you'll be able to save it and move on to the next district. I do want to point out that as you're drawing these maps and they're draft, nobody has access to it but you. So they're private. I don't have access to them. The demographer doesn't have access to them. Once you're complete, you'll be able to submit it by sending it, and it'll go over to our consultant, who will then finalize it, give us a report on the demographics, and then have that in the mapping system. Or you can share it, and that is a tool in which you'll be able to collaborate with other people, and so you'll be able to assign who you want to be able to share the map with, and then you all can take turns adjusting the map. But there's two options really. It's sharing, but that doesn't get submitted yet, and then submitting it, and that means it's done and it's final. You'll be able to access it. When you go into the system, you'll need to create a login. That's going to make it so that you don't have to sit there for 4 or 5 hours at one sitting to draw these maps. You'll be able to come back to them and refine them and then submit them when you're done. Additionally, the first thing it's going to ask you is if you want to draw a 4-district map or a 5-district map. And so that way it tells you the appropriate goal for the population count. We are going to create a video. It will be approximately 15 minutes. It'll go step by step on how to use the tooling system. In addition, there's other video clips that are less 90 seconds to 120 seconds that will teach you how to use the system. So again, the focus of tonight is to find out what your neighborhood or community of interest are. Do you prefer neighborhoods to be kept together as one district or to have multiple representatives? And what other communities of interest in the city should be considered when drafting the maps? I want to share our email address. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I have my business cards in the back. In addition, you can email our consultant at palmsprings@ndcresearch.com. Our website, psdistricts.com, is updated constantly, and it has all of this information in English and Spanish. And then I wanted to share what some other cities have done as far as districting goes, and particularly for the business districts. You could see in the city of Pasadena, they wanted to focus on ensuring that council districts touched their downtown, which is Colorado Boulevard. And so you can see that they created a map that ensured that all of the districts touch Colorado Boulevard. They also had to ensure that it did meet the goals of the CVRA, which is to strengthen minority voting power, but they were also able to keep it with a focus on their downtown. The county of San Luis Obispo, because the city of San Luis Obispo itself is the power and the population center of the county, they were able to get most of the districts touching San Luis Obispo and split San Luis Obispo into 4 districts. And then in the city of South Pasadena, where I just came from, you can see that we drew districts that were up in north and south of the city because the minority groups lived in the upper part of the city and then in the center part of the city. And so they drew the maps to enable the minority groups to be strengthened, as well as ensuring that 4 districts touch their downtown, and their downtown is Mission Street, and so the only district that's not touching it is District 5. So I'll leave it with the questions that we've proposed and turn it over to the council subcommittee.
Okay. Before we get into your questions and your comments, we thought we'd find out who's actually here and what part of the city you live in. So if you live north of Vistacino, would you stand up? It's a pretty good crowd. And if you live west of Indian Canyon, would you stand up? A few. Okay. How about south of Palm Canyon? And those that are east of Sunrise? And how many of you are in the center part of the city, south of Vistacino, east of Indian Canyon, west of Sunrise, and north of Palm Canyon? All right. It is actually a pretty good cross-section of residents from throughout the city that we have. So we're going to take this row by row. We're going to give everyone in the first row an opportunity to ask their questions and then work our way one row at a time all the way back to the back row. We do not have timers on this. What I ask is that, and we ask, when you get up, try to keep your questions and your comments as short to the point as you can so that everyone, including those in the back row, have an equal opportunity to be heard. So with that, is there anyone sitting in the front row who would like to speak? Mr. Worthy? The podium is over here to my left, to your right.
Okay, so what's embarrassing about the city is crime. It's not a secret that crime is a horrendous problem in the Coachella Valley, and we're waiting to hear back from Sergeant Hutchinson, who to date has not returned my or anyone else's phone calls that I know of, about the recent or most recent per capita crime statistic in the city. It is horrendous. Up and down Sunrise.
Mr. Worthy, we're here not for general public comment, but to talk about city districts and to discuss communities of interest.
I understand that, but I'm wondering just, what is the point? It's a little confusing about splitting up the city for voting districts. We're going to have what? Issues or agendas in those districts? I mean, suggestions, or what is the point? I mean, I understand legally what you're doing, but can you stop a moment and be clearer about what this means if it goes to that? Because I've heard something about city council members representing specific parts or these districts. Is that true?
Individuals will be elected from specific districts.
Right.
But they will serve the interests of the entire city.
Well, and so I beg to differ. These neighborhood associations are going to be most interested and concerned about crime.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
It's horrendous, and it has to be corrected, and Chief Reyes has to go. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Anyone else from the first row? Thank you.
Okay, now I'm even more nervous because we're closer. Just a couple of questions. In addition to race, ethnicity, are there other demographics that we're looking at? I live near Sunrise Park, and I know there's a lot of apartment buildings there, a lot of renters. I don't know if that's something that's coming into play versus owners. And then I found the information like from Pasadena and the other cities helpful. Is that kind of information to look at other cities and how they've arranged their districts? Is that available at this website, or are there other sites that might have that?
I can certainly add to our website some samples of other cities.
Okay, that'd be helpful just to work from. Yeah.
And then when you go into the mapping, renters is one of the categories there's information on.
Oh.
So that could be a community of interest.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
So thank you for the question.
I do just want to add really quickly. So when it comes to communities of interest like renters, these heat maps, there's a lot of different heat maps that we can add to the website. So as you're looking at using the paper-based system, we can add that to the website. So all I need to know is what those ideas are. If renter groups are of interest to the community, then we can certainly get those maps online.
Others in the first row? Yes.
So I'm wondering, and maybe you've already said this or maybe it's printed somewhere in the materials, but how are you figuring the percentage of Asians here? How are you figuring the percentage of the different demographics, Latinos and things? How did you come up with those numbers? That's my first part of the question. And then the second is, where are homeless people fitting into the equation here?
So I can answer the first part, which is the demographic data is pulled from the 2010 census. So that's a great point. So we know that the demographic data is a little bit old, but federal law requires that districts be based on census data. So in 2021, when the new census data is provided, that data will then cause the city to have to redo the maps to ensure that we adjust for any shifts in population or minority groups. As far as where do the homeless population fit in?
As I understand current California law, you need an address in order to be able to register to vote. And I have not studied this in detail, but I believe that is the case, in which case an individual who is homeless would struggle to be able to identify an address. I don't know if there is not some provisions that would allow individuals who are homeless to identify where they are residing and be able to register to vote. At the last point and count census that we had for Palm Springs, there was, I believe, less than 200 individuals that were identified as homeless in our city.
My understanding, but we will do more research, that's a terrific question, is that in California, homeless people can register at an address they state is their address. So that's my understanding of California law, but we will research that and get that out. It's a really an important issue, and we want to make sure our homeless residents have the opportunity to vote and know where they would vote. So thank you for that.
Are there any others in the first row who would like to speak or to ask questions? With that, anyone in the second row who would like to speak or ask a question? You don't have to be recognized. You can line up if you like. Hi there.
Hi, thank you so much for having this hearing today.
Could you identify yourself?
I'm sorry?
Could you identify yourself?
My name is Michelle Moran. I live in Palm Springs. I understand, or I imagine, that some city council members will be running for re-election after these districts are drawn. And since the council is having the final say on how these districts will be drawn, I'm wondering what you're doing to mitigate against any personal self-interest in the final decision in the mapping. Thanks.
I get the fun questions. One of the things that we were told very early on in this process is that we had the opportunity to direct the demographers to essentially sort out all of the current city council members and draw sample districts that would accommodate each one of us into a separate district. We did not ask the demographers to do that. We want to address the question of what are the communities of interest. Every one of us, I am certain, has an idea of districts that we think would be appropriate, but ultimately we're looking for input from all of you as to what the district should look like. The professional demographers will draw some sample districts, and then city council members will be choosing among those districts in accord with the objectives that we outlined, which are primarily to advance the interest of the California Voting Rights Act. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jan Seaman. I live in Cathedral Canyon Country Club, the part of it that is in Palm Springs. And for those of you who don't know, it's off the map over here on the right. Actually, the two council members here do know where it is. And my concern, and it's really more of a statement than a question because I don't assume there is an answer yet, but my concern is that when I look at the population of Palm Springs, that pretty much reflects the population of our community right now. About 40% of our members of our owners are year-round residents. I swear that Palm Springs swells to 100,000 during the season, and if you don't believe me, try to make a beeline down Palm Canyon, drive in 15 minutes when in July you can do it in 5. So I'm sure that there are, and I would call this a community of interest. Somebody earlier mentioned renters and just vacancies of people that are snowbirds and that are not here year-round. And I don't know if there are pockets like this around the city. I'm assuming that there are neighborhoods where there's a higher preponderance of people whose homes represent their second residence and that are not as highly populated in the summertime as they are in the wintertime. But I feel that we have some very unique issues and certainly some very unique challenges, and I would hope that there would be a level of visibility represented on the City Council that would fairly represent those and bring those up for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, I think that Councilman Coors must be very proud because that was part of his election campaign to have the redistricting. So anyway, there are a couple of items I want to bring up. First of all, with important issues like this, I get always very disappointed in our not too great local paper. They had a little article about it several weeks ago. There's been no mentioning since. Here it's so important. Okay. Frank Tyson. Can you hear me now? Yeah, I'm disappointed in the fact that our local paper doesn't really get into issues like this in depth. And for instance, we have a lot of people here tonight, but we should have had more people. I think there's, unfortunately, not everybody is computer friendly and looks at the website. And I think maybe ultimately we might have to start buying ads like some cities do in the paper when there's an important issue, because everybody should be involved in this. That's number one. Number two, I like to speak a little bit about the number. I may be wrong, but I seem to it might have been that at one point we had 7 districts, but maybe I'm wrong. But I would be definitely in favor of having 7 districts, because the more democratic we can make the city, the better. Because so far, it's been very scary that you have to have $250,000 to run for office in this city with 45,000 people. And the more districts you have, the more democratic you become. And I think that's a very important issue. The other thing is, as far as the issue of mayor is concerned, I definitely don't think we should have a rotating mayor. I'll tell you why. Some people, you have to really have time to be mayor here, full-time. Practically, it's a full-time job. Now, we've been trying, for instance, our small hotel association has been trying to have a meeting with Christy Holstedge since November, and she's too busy, she says. And I think she probably is very busy, but, you know, that would not be a good thing for a full-time mayor. So I really think that we really need to think that through, that whoever is going to be mayor is going to have to be willing to spend all his time or her time to it. And finally, I think that when it comes to the business district, I think it seems to me a very sensible thing that as many as the districts can touch upon it, the better, rather than having one solid business district. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. Either way. Just on the outreach, we are doing ads, we're doing bus shelters. Every single address in the city was sent a mailer with the dates of these. I'm seeing a lot of people nodding their heads. So the city is doing a great deal of outreach. Everything's in English and Spanish. We've been doing TV interviews, radio interviews. So there's a full campaign. We brought on an outside diversity consultant to work with us. So we're actually doing outreach in neighborhoods and churches and through 1PS, and the list goes on. So there's a great deal of outreach in addition to folks going on the website, just so I want to make sure the public knew that.
At one time, it's my understanding the Palm Springs City Council did include 7 individuals. That goes back a number of years. The advice that we have received from our city attorney is that we don't have the option of considering that as a part of expanding the number of people on city council as a part of this process. Certainly one of the things that we do expect to happen in having district-based elections is the cost of running for office, and the tenor of campaigning will be different when you are running in a district as opposed to when you are running citywide. And will that make it possible for individuals that are less funded to be successful? I think that's something that will have to play out over time, but most political analysts would say it is more likely that less funded candidates will have a better opportunity to be successful. I'm not sure politicians are supposed to thank reporters, but there are 2 individuals from the Desert Sun that are here tonight, and we thank them for being here. The second row who would like to speak. All right, the third row. It's your time to come on down.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Kane. These might be uneducated questions, and I'm sorry, but I'm just curious about how the sort of tribe integrates with this process at all, or tribal land, and then the industrial area, because as you know, I work in the cannabis industry, so there's a lot of folks in those areas doing the cannabis business, and I'm just wondering how that impacts industrial areas since there are as many people living there.
So it's all based, when it comes to districts, it's really based on population. So certainly if you're telling us that we should have a council district that focuses on industrial areas, that's a community of interest. And so if there's a particular area in the city where it makes sense to kind of concentrate and having either 1 or 2 council members represent that area, giving us that feedback is important. When it comes to the tribal lands versus regular lands, there's really no difference when it comes to the districting process, unless somebody were to say, maybe the tribe says, hey, there's a higher concentration of Native Americans in this area, or there's a lot of tribal land in this particular area. We would like to have a council district formed in that area based on a community of interest. Again, that's just feedback for the council to consider when it's making its decisions. Any other?
I could certainly see individuals coming forward and saying neighborhoods or communities that have significantly greater amount of leased land would like to be considered a community of interest. It would be one more unique to our particular city, but If that is something that people express, then we will do our best to respond to that.
Thanks.
And I'll just say in our mapping system, the GIS online, the super system, it does include a little overlay of tribal lands. It's not to the parcel level, but it kind of goes by census, census areas, and puts a little overlay on it that says this area is a little bit heavier concentrated with tribal lands.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Cruz, and I'm the chair from the Sunrise Vista Chino Neighborhood Coalition. I'd like to thank you for having a gentleman here signing for the people who are hearing impaired. My wonderful neighbor, Marianne, is sitting right here. I was so happy that she was able to come. My question for you is about the Desert AIDS Project, and of course the business district across the street with the grocery stores. How does that get included in splicing up the district? Is there anything that takes away from the population that lives here, or is anything granted as to how we identify them in our neighborhood? Do they qualify?
So to qualify, you have to be under the census. This has to be your primary address. That's how the census makes decisions. People who live in the housing at Desert AIDS Project would qualify, there's probably one census tract is my guess. The shopping center doesn't qualify for census tracts, but again, if people want the businesses in the Vista Chino Sunrise area to be in one district, that could be a community of interest. And if people feel they actually want two people to represent that area, they might want it split at Sunrise or Vista Chino. So that's the kind of thing, as you're looking at communities of interest, you should be looking at. Similar to downtown, right? Any area might feel, we'd like two people who represent this bigger area, or we only want one who can really focus on it.
And I have a side spot here. There is a planned, I want to say, condos or apartments that are going to be built on the property for the Desert AIDS Project expansion. They're not suited to be built maybe within the next year or year and a half. How will that be included in the redistricting?
Our primary source document for information is the 2010 census, which clearly is a dated census. We will have an obligation after the 2020 census is completed to draw district boundaries all over again, just like any other entity has to draw districts every 10 years. So there will be some catching up where, and I'll let Anthony answer this, but my understanding is where we can clearly document residency and numbers, then we can take that into account.
Yeah, so when we're talking about planned future growth up to basically 2020, we can account for adding a few numbers into a particular census area to adjust for that now. But particularly that really focuses, I think, as Kathy knows, to the general plan and planned projects that we know about that are, have applications in and they're in the process. However, in 2020, when the census is done, it will account for any new population growth that has occurred up to that point and was captured in that census. And then the council will be obligated to adjust its boundaries to account for the population shifts.
Thank you very much.
On the idea of the Desert AIDS Project and the grocery stores and the business district, again, it goes back to you telling the council, in particular, what you think is your neighborhood of community or your community of interest. So for me, if the grocery store is across from my apartment complex and I want the council to know, I think that they should be combined into one district, that's what we need to know.
Is there anyone else in the third row? In the fourth row?
Remember what I was was going to say. Good evening. My name is David Austin. I'm a resident here in Midtown Palm Springs, so this neighborhood. I want to thank you, first of all, for the comment you made about one of the goals being to try to sustain our One Palm Springs communities to the extent that you can. And hopefully when this is all done, maybe we can tweak the two of them together and it will remain a unified, or at least if there's a split down the middle, it's pretty obvious. On the subject of downtown, I don't want to be too redundant, but because I live here and relatively close to downtown, if one were going to create a downtown district, those of us nearby, and most of us are happy to be nearby most of the time, those of us nearby would have to be, for population purposes, drawn into that. My concern is that the residents could be overwhelmed in terms of influence at election time, at least, if we're not able to contribute as senior citizens on fixed incomes like downtown businesses can. So I would agree with those who have commented that trying to get as many council districts as possible to touch our downtown, which is awfully important to who we are and how this city funds itself, that the majority of the council being involved in that would be a good thing. On the other thing I congratulate you for is your philosophy that every city council member is going to represent the entire city. Great concept, put things in place that'll help you do that, but human nature is still human nature, and in one sense, we're doing this because we want the council member to represent a community of interest in their district. So there's some general conflict between those two goals as well. I know you don't have a lot of time, right? And I'm sure that's why the city attorney said, hey, you can't change the structure of the council while doing this process. It would seem to me that it's likely that 5 districts will be easier to pull off than 4 in terms of meeting the minority representation goals. I could be wrong, but assuming that's the case, an easy way to deal with this would be to do 5 districts, agree at the start you're going to rotate the mayor, and then turn around and put an item on the next election to change that to an at-large elected mayor in addition to the 5 districts. Although that's an even number, maybe you don't want to do that, but you can work it out after 2020. But I think having an at-large mayor provides a conscience for your stated goals of everybody representing the whole city, and to say, now, council member, really, are you really telling me that's your view of the whole city's perspective? Just for what it's worth. Thank you.
Anyone else in the 4th row? All right. The 5th row. Oh, I'm sorry.
My name is David Bronette. I'm a Midtown resident also. I just had something that my husband just brought up, and I wasn't too clear what he just said. Or maybe clarify it. I was a little concerned about this quote-unquote loyalty oath that council members had to take to the city. I'm just personally, what's going on in this world, I just don't believe in loyalty oaths to, to a city, an entity, as opposed to the individuals. And I think, definitely an at-large mayor, that's the point of an at-large mayor, is to be concerned for all the citizens. And yes, the local person is going to represent the interests of the local community if it's based on communities of interest. Otherwise, it's self-defeating if your loyalty comes to the city first. You're here to represent different people in different areas. Otherwise, what's the point?
Thank you. It's not a loyalty oath, but it is a provision that you must place the best interests of the city.
It sounds another way of saying a loyalty oath to me. Okay. Without calling it a loyalty oath, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's implied by someone who runs for office. And if you're not accountable as a mayor to everybody, then we'll vote you out. And the same thing, you know, people find individual districts or whatever, but that's the whole idea of individual districts. You're representing me and my needs because I have different needs than someone else in another district would have. And I just don't think it's necessary to even put it in there. Okay.
Anyone else in the fourth row? What about the fifth row?
Good evening. My name is Paul Henriksen, Palm Springs resident, and I'm a tech guy. So, of course, the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. I noticed an error on slide number 12. They show a section here at the north end as being 25 to 35% Latino, when in fact there are no houses there. So I'm not quite sure where that came from. There's 1,150 homes being built in that area, planned to, but as of yet, there's not even one foundation there. So I just wanted to point that out so someone can take a look at it. There was a mention of the homeless count. I happened to have been there when they made the announcement. The 2018 census, homeless count in time, whatever they called it, resulted in 119, just to answer that question. And then also those who are working on, the committees working on this might want to talk to my husband and I, because we're the co-chairs of 1PS Neighborhood Formation Support, and there are currently several new neighborhoods being considered. And there's also several looking at expanding. So if they have interest, get a hold of 1PS, Neighborhood Formation Support. There's an email link on the 1PS website. You can reach us, and we'll be glad to talk with you about any interest regarding that. And then I think you actually already addressed this, considering there are several sizable developments coming up here in Palm Springs, some of them sooner rather than later. For example, Miralon, which I mentioned on the map, has an error, and that'll be basically possibly a 5 to 8% increase in the population of the city just in that development. So I guess that would be redistricted based on the next census. Is that right? That was it. Thank you very much, and thank you for holding this forum.
I do want to just make a quick comment. I don't know if the Miralon development or that error is there or not, but I do want to just point out, as you're going through the GIS system and you're playing with it, sometimes the heat map can be misleading, because I know in my experience, if there's only one residence in that census block, it's going to show up as red if it's Latino, because there's only one residence in that entire census block. And so, of course, it's going to show up as heavy on Latino. So when you drill down into the GIS system and you click on that census block, it's going to give you the demographic data. It's either going to say 5 people live there or 100 people live there. And I don't know what, I'll definitely look at whether or not that's an error. But as you're playing with the system, do recognize that sometimes the colors can be deceiving.
Hi, my name is Les Young, and the only comment I have is, as I looked at the concept of all districts touching downtown, I thought of retail maps, and generally in retail maps, you hope that you look at the center of the business, and unfortunately our mountain really causes a problem for us. Now, if downtown ran Tockets from the mountain to the airport, or it ran Sunrise from east to west, you might be able to have multiple neighborhoods touching, or multiple districts touching downtown. Doesn't seem like pie cutting the city up would do much for neighborhoods to try to achieve that. Maybe we can think about, the airport dropping into a district which is not touched by, a district that touches downtown, so that there's important factors involved in other districts. But I don't see how all of us could have the opportunity to have every district touch downtown. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Robert Heinbaugh, and I'm a resident of Palm Springs. And to be consistent with the World Cup, I'm not going to flash a red card, but I'm going to flash a yellow card. And that's a concern that flashed through my head when you were talking about the odd year, even year elections. And my question is, what happens with the now scheduled election for City Council in 2019 vis-a-vis a proposal to hold the elections in the even years? What happens with people who are up for election? What are we going to do with it?
Sure. And this is an issue that we have attorneys researching, because the state has said that most cities need to move to even number elections. If they ever had an election where their off-year election, the odd year elections, was 25% below general turnout. We've had one that we know of in our history when we had two incumbents running who won handily, and we didn't have that big a turnout. Compared to most cities, our off-year council elections, we had very high turnout, over 50%. But in presidential elections, we hit 90%. I mean, we are an engaged community. So it's a question of whether charter cities have to comply with that, and there's a split of opinion on that. There's no case law yet. So we are looking into that issue. If we do need to move to even year elections, the earliest we would have to do it is 2020, possibly 2022. So those are the issues we're finding. It doesn't stop us from doing 2019 election. The state law allows councils, in order to get onto that schedule, to either extend council members' terms 1 year from 4 to 5, or take 1 year off from 4 to 3. You would guess most councils have gone 4 to 5 around the state, but that's something that we're going to discuss in this process. So although we could go to 2020 instead of 2019, right now that hasn't been anything council has discussed, but it will be part of this decision-making process, and we're hoping to have a good analysis from the city attorney by the time we're talking about that in September, because we want to know what our options are.
Right. Tip O'Neill said, all politics are local.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else in the fifth row? Okay, how about the next row, number 6? Don't be shy. All right. The row following that. And the row following that. I think we're up to the 8th row now. Yes. Bruce?
Come on down.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Bruce Hoban, and I live in Sunrise Park. And if I could ask you to turn to slide 8 for one moment, which goes about the federal laws, equal population, federal voting rights, no racial gerrymandering, and then traditional criteria. When you look at the traditional criteria, okay, they don't fit part of this town. We do have the tribe lands. That's really not a voting issue or an access to the right to vote. Sorry, okay? What we do have that's very different, though, is 2 unique things. 34% of our households here are secondary homes, okay? They're vacant. People don't live in them. The question is, do those people have a right for input into this process? So by sending out mailers just to residential addresses, we're taking a chunk of the people who might wish to have input, who have property here, okay, and not letting them know. I'm just raising that, not as the biggest thing in the world, just as a point, okay? More importantly, though, is the 2010 census did allow one particular question about your marriage status. It was the first time ever done to find out whether or not you indeed were married to a gay or lesbian. And I see that none of that data is included here. That is the third unique thing about our town, is it's estimated to be over 50% gay and lesbian, and the data should be, I hope, available to put in here as an overlay, understanding that it is 8 years old, okay? And understanding that we're not asking orientation at the time, but at least we would have some indicators to make sure that we're creating a balanced, fair mix across the districts.
Thank you. Very good. And I saw the city clerk taking notes. The next, are that aisle, are there any others? Okay, Joy.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having the opportunity for this input. I've been trying to look into this for a few days, and there's a lot of interesting ways that this has gone on in many cities. So I live in Movie Colony East, and then I have a business in downtown Palm Springs and also a business in the Desert Highland neighborhood. And so it's very interesting to watch this process take place, as each of those are so very different from each other, and to try to imagine what it will be like to have one person to represent, and it's going to be a very interesting thing. So I did have some things, though, I am wondering if they could be added. I'd be kind of interested to know what the people's ages are in this mix of things. Just because, I think that to really reach out to younger people would be a great idea, and one of the things that maybe we could look at as far as people that would be of voting age, especially, not just children, but people that would maybe be able to run. This is going to be a daunting task, because even as I look at like the Desert Highland neighborhood and how will that be able to fit in with this to make sure that they have the equal opportunity, the residents that live up there, to maybe be able to afford even to run in an election that has become so cost prohibitive. So age was one of the things, and I think that maybe even male and female, if that could be pointed out. This was the first time in many, many years that we had two women on the council. I think the last was maybe Dana Hodges and Jeannie Reller Spurgeon and her other names. And so I think that that's something that would be very important to keep in touch with as well. And I'm going to really enjoy watching this process take place. I don't adapt very well to change, and anybody that knows me knows that that's true, but I trust you, so make it work. Thank you.
I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of everyone who adapts well to change. Anyone in that aisle, or I think we're to the last aisle. Yes, sir. Thank you for your patience.
My name is Joseph Schroeder. I've lived in Palm Springs all my life. I'm just going to make some comments, and mine is the term communities of interest have been kicked around a lot. The entire city is my community of interest. I live in one neighborhood, and I shop in other neighborhoods, I eat in other neighborhoods, and so my concern is this plan seems like you're taking away part of my voice because we're no longer going to have at-large districts, and I'm wondering how those concerns will be addressed. Thank you.
Sure, and I think 2 points. One, the California Voting Rights Act requires any government entity, so this is school districts, college boards, city councils, county boards of supervisors, to move to district elections if there is any racially polarized voting. And that means that protected minorities vote differently than the community at large. So it's a legal requirement. So that's why it's happening. But I do want to point out we're one of the few entities for all of us where there's at-large voting, right? Whether it's the school board, right? We elect 5 members from districts, whether it's the college board, whether it's assembly or senate or Congress. Most government entities are representative democracies. You're elected from a district to a larger body. So hopefully, we'll work better than some of those. But that's sort of the reasoning behind it. But that's the reason that the state legislature passed the Voting Rights Act, which is much stronger than the federal one, because they wanted to make sure that protected minorities under California law were able to influence elections. And they felt that the remedy that they're requiring is district elections. So that is the rationale, but it's a point well taken. I also just wanted to follow up something Joy and a few other people said, which is, people being able to run, and hopefully there will be less money needed to run in districts because there are a smaller number of voters you need to reach out to, and a grassroots campaign hopefully can work without having to raise a lot of money. But that said, as we talk about this, one of the things we are going to look at, in addition to everything up here, the years, but also if there are barriers for people to run, whatever they may be, we want to hear what those are. Because the goal here is to make sure everyone has an opportunity to serve. This is not, in theory, a full-time job. And we have to really look at, are there things we can do to make sure that everyone can serve and it doesn't predominantly end up being retired people or people who have the means to either self-fund their campaign or have the associates to fund a campaign, who don't need to have another job in order to pay the bills. So we really do want to hear if people have thought about running and they can't, if there have been barriers. So as we move forward past communities of interest into that next phase, that's going to be an important piece for us, so the council can really look into that, because we realize that is an issue. So thank you for pointing that out, the several folks who did.
And to pick up on the theme of putting the interests of the city first, all of us have now seen our state legislatures, our Congress, our Senate. There's a recognition that those individuals are representing both their district or their state and representing the country, or depending on, for those in the legislature, the state. You can do both at the same time. All of us who have sat on city council, I know one of the things that we're looking forward to is currently we frequently, an issue happens and someone sends an email to all 5 of us. And all 5 of us think that we have an obligation to take and respond to that individual email, but we can't copy one another because that would be a violation of the Brown Act. So you end up getting sometimes 2, 3, 4 responses depending on what the issue is. In the future, when we do have districts, the individual who's representing that district will know it's your job to respond to that particular email, to that complaint, to that issue, as well as your colleagues will know it's that person's job to respond to that individual. And we'll all be competing with one another to be the best at responding to the constituents in our particular district. Are there any others who would like to make any more comments or ask any more questions? Yeah.
This is just on the theme of what's a community of interest. I live in Ascena, and I'm not really saying how I want my district drawn, but we're impacted by CV Link and the Wash. We're impacted by Vista Chino flooding every time there's a rain. We're impacted with wind, and we're impacted with airport noise, and we're impacted with how easy it is to get down Ramon to the city or get down Vista Chino to the city. So when you're thinking about districts, and this is what we on our committee had really wanted to hear from people today, is what kind of things, if you have a representative and you want them to think about the issues that where you live fits. I'm sure that everybody in every neighborhood here has, I know people on Farrell worry about traffic, but we haven't heard as much of that tonight. And it would be really helpful to us if you write comments and when you draw maps to think about those kinds of things that impact you and where you think it might be helpful to have a representative who could deal with some of those issues. Thank you.
Tim?
Good evening. I'm Tim O'Bailey, and I want to piggyback on what Kathy just said because it made me think. I'm the co-chair, co-founder of Little Tuscany, or was the co-chair. And my community of interest is the Chino Cone, and there are no voters there. And it's, I believe, within the city limits. And so maybe it's just obvious and I should just shut up, but it seems like that kind of thing, whether it's Indian Canyons or Chino Cone, those are the things that are important to our neighborhood. So it just made me think. Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, and as you're thinking about, right, whether it's shopping centers or open space, and the Chino Cone's a great example, that's something to bring up, which is, that's really important to my neighborhood and probably the surrounding neighborhoods. It's important to the whole city, of course, but keeping the neighborhoods that are near the Chino Cone together could be something you'd want to submit and say, that's a priority of mine. And drawing a map that does that and submitting that map. And, from other cities, most people only draw their district because that's what they know. But you're free to draw your district, other districts, 5 districts, 4 districts. That's up to you. But really, you know your district best, so really think about that in your comments because you know the issues that are important to your neighbors and the people who live near you and to you. So that's a good point. Thank you.
Jeffrey.
My name is Jeffrey Bernstein. I have 2 comments. One is that I know you talked about for the downtown whether you would have different districts abutting it. And the question is, could you have council members be responsible for a designated industrial or commercial area, even if it's not adjacent to their own district?
So I think you could have, as we now do, we have liaisons to a number of organizations, so we could do something similar. We could have a liaison. We actually have a liaison to Main Street and an alternate. Right? I think the mayor's the current liaison, and I think Councilmember Middleton is the alternate. So there are ways to do things along that. We have 2 council members who are on the cannabis subcommittee. So there are other ways to address some of those issues, yes.
Okay. And then the other question I had, and I had brought this up at another community forum, is what it would take to make the city councils actually full-time jobs and paid as full-time jobs, because I think part of the local representation is inhibited just by the fact that people can't really afford, even if it takes less time to do the job, because it really should be a full-time job, and it ends up being that. So what would be the process that takes, not to pay you more, but so somebody else wanted to run could be have it as a full-time job? Thank you.
And thank you for that. The focus that we have here is certainly the issue of whether or not city council is full-time work or significantly more work than was anticipated by the part-time job. I think is something anyone who's served on city council here knows. People in Palm Springs demand a lot of you, and we want to give that to you. It takes a lot of time. That's a conversation that needs to happen. And some of that will probably happen over the course of the next few months. But it's not one that we have the capacity to make changes on as a part of this process. It is something that could be considered down the road as a part of another process. Is there anyone else who would like to speak or be heard?
Please.
So I just want to give a quick reminder that there's a lot of ways to give input. I have my business cards in the back. You're welcome to email me If you have any written ideas on communities of interest, that will be compiled and provided to the City Council when it's making its considerations, and also to the demographer. The comment cards that we have in the back, you're welcome to go ahead and fill them out and drop them off tonight. Again, there's the paper mapping system, then the combined kind of interactive mapping system with the paper system, and then the full GIS system if you're willing to go into that depth. And you're always welcome to contact me. I'm happy to try and assist you using that GIS system. And if I can't help you, then we will ask the demographer to help you.
Our agenda for the meetings that will occur at 1 PS at the James O. Jesse Center and at Demuth, it's the same agenda that we had this evening. We're hopeful that in going out to different places in our community, that we will make it easier for a larger number of people, a more diverse community of people to come to the meetings. And so they may be a little bit different because the public comments that we will receive in one forum could be somewhat different than what we get. But it is reaching out to all of our communities that we are anxious to do. And we have a lot of work to do. We need your help, and we're absolutely thrilled with the turnout and the comments that we heard this evening. Thank you.
Yeah. And one more thing just to add. We normally do our interviews for boards and commissions in the spring, and people would have started July 1st. We extended that. We're going to do the interviews towards the end of the year. People won't start till January 1st. Because we were going through this process, and it was a great opportunity to outreach, to get more people to apply for boards and commissions, to have our boards and commissions reflect the diversity of Palm Springs. So if you're interested, if you know people are interested, if you have ways to reach out to people, which we will be doing, please do so. If you have questions about boards and commissions, the city clerk, the city manager, and every single member of the city council would be happy to answer questions and talk to anyone about these boards and commissions. It's a great opportunity to participate in the city, and we have such amazing volunteers who help do all this work. So thank you all for coming.